First off, are you okay with me calling you Miss Lee, or do you want me to call you something else?
Hey, I answer to anything, so.
Okay. Well, Miss Lee, also known as the grandmother of Juneteenth, I want to thank you for this opportunity. I want to thank you for taking time to sit with us, and I am honored and privileged um, to be in your presence right now, even though we're virtual. I am so thankful for this opportunity. And before we get
Go
and,
on.
be, and before we get started, I just want to ask, tell us a little bit about Miss Opal Lee.
Well, I tell everybody she's just a little old lady in tennis shoes getting in everybody else's business. And she's loving it. Oh, perhaps I need to tell you I was born in Marshall, Texas. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents on a farm in the summers in Texarkana, Arkansas. Um, my grandfather was a minister, like he had a church in this community and a church in that one. I guess they were called itinerant preachers. I don't remember. But my grandma was the one who ran the farm the most. And he was mischievous. He was short. His little legs stuck out when he rode a stallion. Oh, he was something else. I mean, grandmother would fuss with him because he'd send one of us kids in to get the tea cakes that she was baking. And she would say, Reverend Broadus, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. Because he'd tell us, get you one and get me one, bring me one, But I loved him. He moved around, and so he saw what the others had. And he wanted that for his family and his community. He talked about golf courses and tennis courts and indoor plumbing and all those kinds of things that he wanted for his community. And if he started something, he'd finish it. And so I sort of think it's in my DNA, what I got from my grandpa and from my mom.
Thank you. So, how do you feel about being known as the grandmother of Juneteenth?
I'm the grandmother so many ways. I belong to a grandmother's group. There are about 15, not quite 20 of us. So, and then my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, some of them call me Dear Opal Lee. Some of them call me Mother Dear. Some of them call me Grand. So, hey, I'm used to being a grandma, and I don't mind.
So, we were talking a little bit earlier about Juneteenth, and there's more. It's bigger than being a national holiday. There's more to that. And so my next question, Miss Lee, is why is it important to keep the history of Juneteenth alive?
It's because there are so many people who know absolutely nothing about it. They don't know that after the emancipation, it took 2.5 years for the enslaved people in Texas to know when Gordon Granger came to Galveston with 6,000 or 7,000 Black troops with a General Order number 3 that he eventually nailed to the door of Reedy Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church. And somebody read that to the people when they came in from their labors, and they found out that they were free. They started celebrating, and we've been celebrating ever since. So it's important that people understand that the celebration takes on more than the festival. That when those people got free and they were able to keep their children, they weren't sold away from them, that they were able to name themselves, They were able to buy property. They were able to participate in the legislature. They became officers. There was so much freedom that they enjoyed that they never had before. And so we're trying to pass that on to others, that Juneteenth is about freedom, that we need to celebrate it from the 19th of June to the 4th of July, because we were free on the 4th of July, 1776.
You know, Miss Lee, we were talking about before we started the interview about Juneteenth representing freedom, and we were talking about that there's more to Juneteenth. And so, how could making Juneteenth a national holiday shape the fabric of our nation?
If people understand that working together to dispel the disparities that exist now, if we could band together and address joblessness and being paid the same wage for the same job, if we could get our health system where it does the same thing for everybody, if we could get our school system to tell the truth, to write what's actually happened so that people can understand and make decisions themselves. Climate change, all these things need to be addressed. And we feel like Juneteenth is the bridge that will get us together, that we can go over and get these things addressed.
You know, I love that, and thank you for sharing that, because what I'm hearing you say is that Juneteenth is the catalyst to many of the social issues that we are facing.
Yes.
And I'm sorry.
No, you know, I'll talk on. Just come on with the questions.
You know, it's the catalyst, because to an extent, you know, us celebrating Juneteenth, it would be a jubilee for the nation to say that we've come from this point, from June 19th, 1865, 1866, to here we are in 2000, whatever that, when it'll become a national holiday. I think that is big, because it's going to recognize that while the progress took a while to come, we made the progress.
Yes.
And once we could be honest with ourselves, go ahead.
When I think of it, once it's on the calendar, then people are going to know that it's significant. Mm-hmm. Once it's on the calendar. So we made some folk aware, but there's so many more to make aware. We took 1,500,000 signatures to Congress in September. We need to take 1,500,000 signatures again. We can't let them forget it. We can't under any circumstances. So we don't say Juneteenth, the 19th, and that's it. All year long, we want people to remember about Juneteenth. We just can't let it. I was at the press club in Washington, D.C., and that very same day, the lady out of Texas, her name is escaping me, and I know her so well. She authored a bill that day in the House of Representatives, Sheila Jackson Lee, while in the Senate, Senator Corning authored a bill. Those two bills that very same day, I could have done a holy dance, because we lost our momentum in the fall when before we took the signatures. There had been, in the Senate, they had one long dissenter before they were going to send it to the House of Representatives. Name was Ron Johnson. And so that unanimous vote was lost. Johnson had offered a bill that would make Juneteenth a holiday as opposed to Columbus Day, and it didn't pass. So to have those two author bills the day I was there at the press club, oh, I was so jubilant. I didn't do the holy dance, but I sure wanted to.
Well, hey, that sounds awesome. Speaking of taking those 1,500,000 signatures to DC, what inspired you to walk? Because I would imagine Fort Worth to DC is not 2 blocks. But what inspired you to walk from Fort Worth, Texas, to Washington DC to deliver those signatures?
Well, I was about 89 and I'd been mauling it over. Just because you're old, you don't have to sit and wait for the Lord to come and get you, you understand? I felt like really he gonna have to catch me. But I've gathered some people at my church, my pastor, the musicians of the church, a county commissioner, a school board member, and several others. And we had a little ceremony. And I left that church walking 2.5 miles. The next morning, I started where I left off. And so I walked from Fort Worth to Arlington, to Grand Prairie, to Dallas, to Box Springs, to Joppa. When my team said, oops, we're not going to do it this way. And the reasoning was a group had offered us an RV, so I wouldn't have to go back home or take the hotels and all that stuff. And they reneged. They decided what I was doing was too political. And I don't know how political. So I was told that I'd only go where they had Juneteenth celebrations or where I was wanted, where I was invited. And I was invited all over these United States. I went to Shreveport and Texarkana and Little Rock and Fort Smith and Denver, Colorado, Colorado Springs. I went to Madison and Milwaukee. I was in Atlanta and North, South Carolina. I was all over the place. All of these places that served with the message that Juneteenth needs to be a national holiday.
Absolutely. And you talked about going to several places. 2 of them that you mentioned, I have called home. But it shows that you were welcome there. Not only welcome, but these were places that you mentioned that were celebrating Juneteenth. And so to see those different cities as they welcomed you into their celebrations, why is it important for Juneteenth to be a national holiday?
Juneteenth is a unifier. Whether people understand it or not, it's a unifier. If we can get people to understand that there are disparities that we need to be about the business of getting rid of. In the schools, the books need to tell the truth. I don't know what they tell you now. You look at pictures of people picking cotton as if they really love doing it. I pick cotton and I know better. You understand? The schools need to tell the truth so that people can make their own decision. The healthcare system needs to be able to treat us all alike, not decide that because I'm old, shuffle me aside while they wait on somebody else. There's a climate change that we need to address, and joblessness and being paid the same. There are too many things we need to be working on together as opposed to a hierarchy here and people putting a foot on somebody's neck. And there's just too much we can do together that we're not doing.
Yes, I mean that is it's liberating.
Well, I just know that Juneteenth, we ought to be celebrating it from the 19th of June to the 4th of July. I
Yes.
mean, that would be a celebration, would it
Yes.
not? It
Yes.
really would
Yes.
be. I want to mention that this Juneteenth, well, last Juneteenth, we couldn't do the parades that we usually do. And so we did a caravan. I walked 2.5 miles from downtown Fort Worth to Will Rogers Auditorium. And I thought I'd have 10, 15 cars follow me. We had 300 cars, which means
Wow.
I don't know how many people were in those cars, but they have some idea about Juneteenth. Oh, we've got a pamphlet, Juneteenth 101. We just tried to show people that together we can do so much.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely. And it's important, for our young people, our youth, the generations that are coming after us to understand what Juneteenth is. And if they could only say, I celebrated Juneteenth, that's the first step. Yeah, a children's story.
yeah. I wrote a book called Juneteenth, a Children's Story. And it is so well, I hope I can show it to you. You didn't ask me to do this, but I really do. So you got this picture of Granddeer Opal Lee, and the children asked Granddeer to read them a story about Juneteenth. And so I tell them about people who picked cotton and what that was like. And then I go on to tell them that these people, slaves, were stolen. They were taken from their parents, from their sisters and their brothers. And I let them know that you've been told about people who were slaves in the Bible, but they weren't like these folk,
Right.
I want them to know that. And then I tell them about how they were brought across this vast body of water, and that a lot of them didn't make it. They just didn't make it. So I tell them about being brought over. I tell them about working for no pay, and that the people were not good to them. And I tell them about President Lincoln, who was like the President Obama. I tell them about his Emancipation Proclamation, and I tell them let me see. I don't know. Wait a minute. I tell them about watch night services that the churches have now, how we watched and waited for freedom on New Year's. I tell them about that. And I tell them how Texas was so big and it took them so long to get down and tell the slaves in Texas that they were free. And I tell them about Granger and the troops that he brought with him and how they nailed that order to the door of the church. And when they learned they were free, they started celebrating, and we've been celebrating ever since. How the people dressed to the nines, and the music and all that they had. And the day was called Juneteenth. Hello. So, and it has a teacher's guide to it and all that sort of stuff. But we've got to start with our young ones.
Yes.
If these children have been taught to hate, they can be taught to love.
Absolutely.
And so you need to know that a Dr. Charles Taylor has a Juneteenth books for older children,
Yeah.
So we're working at it.
Absolutely.
24/7.
24/7. I thank you for that. And I want to shift gears a little bit here, Miss Lee. And I know earlier you were telling me about when the mob burned down your home when you were a kid. And so my question for you, how did that event, of the mob burning down your home, how did that shape your upbringing, and how did that shape your upbringing?
I'm really not sure what I can say because my parents never spoke of it. They dug their heels in. We moved so many times. I had a brother say we moved 17 different times. And I'd like to tell you about one of those times. But they bought another house. And that's where I was when I finished high school at 16. But we were on the lower end of Terrell Avenue. We were in a shotgun house. You know what a shotgun house is?
I do, okay. Yes.
All right. And we were to move to the 900 block of Terrell Avenue, 917. And my mom had everything on the truck, and we moved, and the whites who were in that house had moved out. And so a lady in the neighborhood says, well, you can stay here until they move. But when her husband came home, he said, you better get them children out of here. I got a boy so mean, he'll kill them all. We moved to a family across the alley who said there was a man and his 2 grown daughters. We could stay there until the family moved. But when my mother would come home in the evening, the ladies had taken their oil stove down to clean it, so my mom couldn't cook or fix any food for us. So we moved again across the street. We stayed there until that family moved out. And it was there where we were when my parents bought the house that they tore up. I don't know. I just know Juneteenth would give us and show people that we deserve, we need the things that they have and that they take for granted. And I don't know if you think that incident would have shaped what I do now. I just know it's in my DNA, and I'm gonna keep on walking. I'm gonna keep on talking till Juneteenth's a national holiday.
All right. Keep walking and keep talking until Juneteenth is a national holiday. All right. I love it. And so with that, while Juneteenth is not a national holiday, yet, I will say it's not a national holiday yet, how do you envision a national celebration for Juneteenth? What and how do you envision that as it being a national holiday? What is happening? What is your vision?
Well, the first thing my vision is that everybody who hears this, everybody you tell them that they can be responsible for helping to make it a national holiday. And all they have to do is to go to opalswalktodc.com and find the link where they can give us their signature. Because we're going to take another 1.5 million to Congress. We're not going to let them think it's one little old lady in tennis shoes, that it is a nation that's willing to have Juneteenth a national holiday. And I envision Juneteenth like Six Flags over Texas, that you've got the festival and the rides, but each segment of where we've come from is noted. There's a section that tells you about when the last slaves found out they were free. And see if people will understand that this is not a Texas thing. It ain't Texas. None of us are free till we're all free. And then in this setting like Six Flags, you're going to have that Jim Crow area. And then you're going to have the area when King was showing us what and how to do. And then you're going to have an area when the Black Lives Matter. All this we're going to have in a setting like Juneteenth. My imagination just runs away with me sometimes.
Oh, I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And so you mentioned, none of us are free until we're all free. What does freedom mean to you, Miss Lee?
It means that my next door neighbor has enough to eat and a decent place to stay, that my grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be paid a wage that's the same as other nationalities, that I don't have to worry about the elderly that are being pushed aside. And I'm one of those. I just feel like Juneteenth would be like going to heaven on earth.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So my last question for you, Miss Lee, is how do you want others to describe your legacy?
Well, I just want them to know that I can be all of them's grandmother, for one thing, that I want them to know that I hope there are other older people who have they've got so much to share, so much to pass on to young people, that they will do it. I just want my legacy to be that the old girl loved everybody and that she felt like she could influence a lot of folk to do the right thing. I just, and see, I advocate that each of us be a committee of one. And we know somebody who's not on the same page with us. And I think it's up to us to change that person's mind, to make them aware of the things that have happened and the things that they can do to correct it. I think this fear that Black folk will rise up and do the kinds of things that happened to us that far back, but that's not the case. And we want people to know that God is love and so are we. And let's get on with the business of making this the greatest country in the world.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Lee, for those empowering words and that empowering statement. And I just want to thank you for taking time with us to share your wisdom with us. Before we end, is there anything else you want us to know about you? Is there anything else that you want to share with us?
Oh, gee, I could talk on and on and on. But if I could get over to the young people to give us their signature by going to opalswalktodc.com and finding that link and telling other people to do the same thing, so we can keep abreast, make Congress aware that we're not going away, that we're going to keep on talking and keep on walking till Juneteenth's made a holiday. And tell them the sooner the better, because I got some other things I want to do.
That's right. And freedom, hope, and joy to find Juneteenth means it's freedom time.
That's
Miss
right.
Lee, Grandmother Lee, I want to thank you. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak with us. And I ask that God continues to bless you and he continues to keep you and he gives you all the resources that you need until Juneteenth, our Juneteenth, becomes a national holiday. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Miss Lee.
Thank you. Thank you.